My name is Ralph Rocco. I was born and raised in Ohio and spent most of my life in Perry, Ohio, and had a lot of fun, of course, playing against Madison and a few other local schools around here. I played in 3 sports.
You know, I wonder, Ralph, as you speak about your Ohio background, your Ohio roots, many people are born here and never return. And my question is, what makes this annual trek every year so special for you? Why do you keep coming back to Ohio?
That's a very good question. And the reason for me, speaking for myself, of course, and that's what you're asking the question, I think people in Ohio and this part of the country, and maybe elsewhere in the periphery of Ohio, that they're just solid citizens. I've traveled all over the world in my business, I've lectured all over the world, and I just come back here because it's home, I guess, more than anything else. And a lot of my friends, I try them. For instance, this next week we're going to have some get-togethers with my graduating class here and so forth. So it's just a wonderful kind of thing, saying, how do I travel all over the place and yet I come back to where it all started, and I just love the place.
Well, you certainly have demonstrated that because you have been so generous to the Unionville Tavern. And I just wondered if you could share a couple of memories or stories that you have about the tavern, knowing that it played, you know, a big part in your life growing up here.
Very good question. It's one of these things where I did go to the tavern a couple times at least, and maybe more than that, when I was growing up. And it was just, the whole history of the place was the kind of thing that you delve into, and they have pretty good history records and so forth. And I just kind of it became a part of me. And not that I'm an authority at history or anything, because I'm educated as an engineer and so forth. But as far as that particular, it just came to me, and we had some parties there from our high school and so forth. So I was introduced in that manner, and it kept going on. It seemed like a lot of people were taking care of that place as time went by, and then as I had a chance to help out and so forth, I stepped up, and it's been just a favorite hobby, if nothing else, for me.
Ralph, I think I remember one time you saying that you would go there for 4-H meetings.
I think that's right. That goes a long way. I'm an old guy.
I know.
So my memory's that good, but I definitely was in the 4-H and had my own garden. I used to specialize in cantaloupes, muskmelons, whatever you want to call them.
You were agriculture, right?
Pardon?
You were in 4-H, your specialty was agriculture.
Agriculture, yes. I went right away to muskmelons, or whatever you want to call them, cantaloupes, and showed them at the fairgrounds and what have you. And so, and then my next door neighbor was the leader of the 4-H, so he trapped me very early in life. And wonderful area, wonderful group to grow up in this particular area of the country particularly.
Why do you think that Unionville Tavern has such a pull for people who may not necessarily even still live in the area?
My feeling, it's like any building that gets old. You just love to have the buildings, if it was feasible, to step up and talk about the background, because I've read things about that, and we had a lot of distinguished people come through there. Now, I don't know whether that was built up by the public writers of the newspapers and so on and so forth or not, but it sure had taken over, if you will, whether it was back in the wagon drawing days, horses or whatever, and that was a place they'd hang out and not regas up, but maybe refeed the horses. But it just came to me as something that old and distinguished, and how many people walk through that place from all stages of life, very young to the ones of ex-presidents and so on and so forth. So it's really a landmark that we should keep alive forever and ever.
That's a great answer. Thank you. I want to ask you if you could work in the Unionville Tavern in your answer. Just say it so people, because they won't hear my voice on the tape. They'll only hear you. So if we could say the Unionville Tavern. So I'll ask you that question again. We'll just do a take 2 on it.
Okay, as if I say again.
I just want you to say, when you speak about it, just say the Unionville Tavern or the Tavern. either or.
Okay, bring it into the,
Yeah.
in the answer.
So I'll ask you the question again.
Sure.
You did a great answer. This is just a take two. Why do you think the tavern has such a pull on people who may not even live in the area any longer? It just seems to, people have such great stories, and they always have some sense of place about it as part of their own personal Ohio history. I mean, what do you think the pull is there with the tavern?
Well, first and foremost, that's a very good question, because I really think you can read about it in books and so forth, but it's kind of once removed from you. But when you go to the you look around and you say, this has been there, 5 times my age or whatever it might be, and it's still standing, and people still go there. They still adore it. It's a landmark that's going to be there forever as long as they continue to modernize it. In a sense, they have to keep that up. But it's one of those things that when it once leaves you, it'll be gone forever. And I'm so proud of the fact that a lot of people have contributed over the many years for people like me to come in, not as a contributor, but for me to recognize that there were an awful lot of people in this chain of command, if you will, that have kept that here and as a beautiful landmark here for the state of Ohio.
That's true. My question is, why did you, when you think about the tavern and all the restoration that needs to be done to preserve it and keep it going and modernize it, as you say, why did you step up personally and match the state of Ohio funds to begin the first phase of the project? That was a very bold move on your part. Why did you do that?
The reason for my making a contribution is because I had spent time in there when I was going to graduate school or before, pre-grad school at Ohio State as an engineer. I came there and I had friends that we'd go in there, and also my parents, once in a while, many years ago, would take me through it. So it was one of these things where you look around, you say, this has been there that long. The materials they used in that structure, being an engineer, that's where I gravitate to. And so it was just one of these things that I was so proud of it. And when I looked at the way it was put together on the inside, of course there are changes over the years, but there's still some original work in there. And to look back and figure out how those people put that together when we didn't have all the electric machinery and all the easy things that we have today to build buildings. And it's still there. It's been in a lot of the buildings we build today will never come close to being on this earth as long as that building has been.
So you feel when I hear you speak, it's about a man who appreciates architecture, history, the spirit of a place, and a sense of place.
I think so. That's a very good question, because the way I answer this, I've always looked at the buildings and how things were done long before I was born. And to see the evolution in modern buildings today, where we design them so if you have bad storms, they give away. It's not like playing football or baseball and putting your hand out really firm, and then you have a fastball and it hurts your hand all the time. You kind of do this to it. In like manner, you could see the building and how they did things when they didn't have all the techniques and all the equipment and so forth. It was just amazing with the imaginations they had when they did the thing. And look how long it's been there. I mean, that's the proof of the pudding. It's not what I say. It's someone had that foresight. And being an engineer, I kind of have that. Well, how did we get to where we are today? And who did it and why? Did they stumble into it, or was it really a long algorithm of some sort that they completed and solved the problem? But it's there. It speaks for itself. I can't do justice by talking about the tavern, because it's there. It's the message. And you go there, you look around, at least I do, and I say, boy, how did God make this happen?
Giving back is very important to you, I sense. Why is that?
Well, I think everything I've received, somebody's given to me to begin with. I mean, people say, well, how'd you ever do that? Because I don't want to get into the law background, but land guys on the moon and things like this that I've been in. I'm just fascinated. People still ask me about how'd you ever do this or how'd you do that? And it really wasn't me. It was a whole team to begin with. And we build on each other's ideas, and we were just motivated. It's one of those things where you decide in life, well, I'm going to be a part of this group. And I'm sure those people that built that tavern had the same feeling, internal feeling of saying, we're not going to do a sloppy job. We're going to put something together here. It's going to be for years. And you can see that. As an engineer, you look for life cycles. And that life cycle is tremendous in that building. And they just go in there and you can almost lean back and visualize who were the early settlers that used that and how. Where'd they tie their horses or whatever was going on at that time.
Well, you've been the lead in Barber too, but you've been one of our lead funders. You are the lead funder for us when we were able to get the grant. Why do we need other people? Why should other people join our team and, as you say, get the tavern up to where we know it's the equivalent of landing on the moon? Why should other people with corporations or individuals who have that ability to do that, why should they get involved?
I think it boils down to the individuals. It's not how successful they've been in life and how monetarily comfortable they are or anything like that. I think it's a matter of saying, boy, I wonder how old they were. Were their kids starting at 12 years old? They were out there pulling nails or whatever else. And back there, then you have to look at the tools they were using. And it was, like I said earlier, and I don't want to overkill the fact that I'm a graduate in engineering, but I look back in history, even in engineering, and for them to do that, you had to have a lot more people than we do today to do that. We have a lot more machinery, all kinds of things, but that was all kind of hand-carved almost. So it was that kind of thing. When you look at, they had their heart and soul in that. It wasn't a matter of a blueprint somewhere and they're going to tell you all this. It was, you had to have the artistic ability, you had a vision, and you knew it was going to take months to accomplish that, but you knew, like, you had a beautiful engineering drawing, which if you did it today, you'd have all kinds of drawings from all different angles, et cetera, et cetera. But back in those days, people were probably, and I wasn't there obviously, people were probably redesigning that thing 2-3 months ahead of time because they looked at their first sketches and say, well, now we know this. And they changed their ways. And so it was a very proactive effort. It wasn't just a matter of, well, did you put enough concrete here or did that? You just kind of build it out of the ground. It kind of grew.
Piece of art.
It's a piece of art. That's a good term for it.
Say that
piece
again.
of art.
Just say the tavern is.
The tavern is really a piece of art. That's why we should handle it just like it would be some Rembrandt in some type of display in Cleveland or around the world or whatever. We should continue to do that. And not only the fact of it may be a monetary gain and so forth, but just the very fact that people did things back in those days. We have all the tools today with the computers and everything else. We can do so much, particularly in the engineering side, that they had to kind of put their thumb up and say, wonder if this will work or whether that'll work. And they were basically building textbooks in some respects. And the way the whole thing has been, the ground they put it on, they had to make sure that it wasn't going to give away and the building was going to crumble and so forth. So there's a lot behind that, and architects would probably be much more qualified than I am to talk about what happened to that versus in its day of being built versus 100 years before and what modern things we're doing. Now, we look at it today and say, well, we have all this machinery can do such and so, and we could put this thing and replicate it in a very short period of time. But I have no idea personally as the total from end to end, starting and finishing, how long it took. All I know, Granddaddy over there has been there for a long time, and you've got to salute it.
It sounds like too, Ralph, that you are finding at this time in your life that you want to preserve or be part of something, preserving that for future generations. And it's a legacy for you in some way, a local legacy, because you grew up here in this community, in this town, and you look around at young people, and it feels like that's part of why you're donating as well.
Oh, I think all that. And of course, and again, I'm not trying to brag or anything, but I was very much right in the first rocket engines and so forth coming out of graduate school at Ohio State, and working in that area, and how if you were aggressive, had some imagination and so forth, you could push forward. Then, of course, what in the engineering terms, we had a lot of materials to work with today versus years ago. So they had wood there, and they were fashioning all these things. Today, a lot of that stuff is automatically built at some factory somewhere, and they haul it in and pop it into place. Where those people out there, I have to imagine, they're out there hammering away on dies and so forth and coming up with, and if it didn't work, they'd throw that one away and get another piece of wood, and it would be a whole different part versus the techniques we use today in the house. We do things today in building so automated compared to what you see there. It's kind of, when you look at it that way, and plus the fact, because I have a pretty good sized company, and you've got to get people who are tied to the mission. And those are the people, they will think after they go home at 5 o'clock, and tomorrow morning they'll come in with other ideas. That's how we put guys on the moon. Same thing. I was a part of that. So those are the things that those people were doing and modifying. If you had to do it today, with all the materials you had today, and yet the amazing part for me when I go in there is it's still there. There's still, a lot of the original work is still there. And how many buildings do we have left in this country? I can imagine how many, but we have a lot of them, but still, the techniques that were used to build that. You didn't have, RAM or machinery to go in and do different things. You had to do it by have a half a dozen guys carrying logs and what have you.
And tied to the mission is a good way to put the financial mission that's in front of us to fund it. So if you were sitting with somebody, a colleague, a friend, one of your buddies on the Ohio State Foundation board or some of the things, why would you tell them? I know you've said that it's a piece of art and it's an unusual building. It's the historic significance.
It's a historical. What do you call it? There's a word for it, but it's really a historical piece of artwork that has been developed by creative people that they've picked materials and so forth that could go through the tough weather we have around here in northern Ohio, and it's still standing. Sure, along the way there have been parts replaced and so forth, I'm sure, but when you look at all the parameters involved in this thing, and given the role of technology back that many years, it's amazing. It's just amazing.
Why should we care?
Why should we what?
Why should we care?
Hold that.
Okay.
Hold that one thought.
Okay.
Just in case I see this door's cracked here. Just want to make sure. If something big goes by,
Yeah, thank you. I'm just trying to, I know why, but I just want to hear it
Sure.
from you, from your heart.
okay, continue.
Yeah, why should we care?
I think, as I said earlier a couple times, I've been kind of on the forefront when in engineering and so forth, and you're creating things all the time. But you can build a somewhat analogy there, go back from the first time man was in space and so forth. And when you look at that old building, those plans were drawn up. You had to have a number of people that all were coordinating their efforts. You had to select people that wanted to work with the different materials. And so you had to build some camaraderie amongst those people. And when I look at that, it's no different than landing the guy on the moon. There are a lot of people involved, and God bless them, they're no longer with us, but we're doing it. And certainly when that was built, Those people aren't with us. But they stuck to their rights. You know, they went out there maybe in the evenings in the library, if they could find something. They were trying to work with what the state of the art was at that time and then come up with this monument, really, that they built.
Wait, that's such a great way to look at it, a monument, an icon, or it's like an iconic build. It is an iconic.
That's right. It really is a good word, good
Why
icon.
don't you say that?
It's when you really go down to it, it's like other things in life. It's iconic. It's something that people look back later and say, how did anybody think of that in that time? So I don't know whether a half dozen people were involved and kept trying different things and finally found things that would work, or whether it was more people or whether it was 2 or 3 people. Sometimes it's the same with a lot of our breakthroughs in engineering. 2 or 3 people all of a sudden wake up in the middle of the night. I always have a pad of paper next to my bed, and if I think of something, I don't want to lay there all night, staying awake and not getting any sleep, so I write it down very quickly. And so I'm sure that those people, they may not have been using a pencil or whatever they had at those days, but it's the way we collect that data and then come out the next day or next week and so forth and start looking at our ideas, whether or not we can perform or not.
That's what just told me, that's fine.
Let's continue to
Okay.
run.
Yeah. I'll just tell you my next question. So Ralph, I'm gonna ask you, you're doing a great job. This is such a good
All
conversation.
right, thank you.
My next question is, when you first heard about Save the Tavern, I think you were maybe here on I just want to hear if you recall when you first heard about Saving the Tavern, our campaign, and do you recall at all when you contacted the team? Do you have any impressions of that?
That's difficult for me to, other than I had an appreciation for that whole thing, because from the design and so forth, you walk in there and you say, how did those guys come up with those particular ideas? And then here it is years and years later, so you know the ideas worked. And it's not like engineering, you come up with a brilliant idea and 6 months later somebody has a better idea. But that just stood there. It's an emblem of what man can do with the state of the art of the trades.
And where we're at now, we need more money to do that, to preserve it and protect it and save it.
Oh, I think I don't know enough about it because I haven't done all my homework as to who all has been really the key people have made this thing roll along. I'm kind of benefiting for what others have done here, one of my comments, but that's foresight, let's put it that way. And they stayed with it. And here it is today. And of course, when I was younger, I was brought in, taken to that. And so I looked at that there and I said, gee whiz, you know, every time I've been back there, I've almost that, because I look at it as the structure itself and how they carry the loads and so on and so forth. So it's not only a matter of a beautiful building and a beautiful finish and so on and so forth. It's the structure of the whole thing. And taking it back, you had some very capable people working that, and some of it was hand. You know, today we make parts in minutes, do different things, and they all fit together like a puzzle. And back in those days, there's no such thing as that puzzle, based on my research anyway. And it just is one of those things that it's historic for so many reasons, not because it was a tavern or anything else. It was the leading edge. It's no different than landing a guy on the moon. It's the same thing there. We had the tools and so forth in our toolbox. It was just a matter of an application. Now, sure, we had to bring them environment so they could stay alive, et cetera, but a lot of that was already developed. And it was a matter of integrating it together to make it into something that man would remember the rest of their life. And I have a feeling that the old tavern somewhat is a result of something to land on the moon, but it landed in Madison, Ohio.
That's good. When you think of the toolbox right now, what we have in our toolbox in order to keep preserving and saving the tavern, what do you think we have to really look for in our toolbox to keep the project, the mission moving forward?
I think the first thing you have to look at is just, it's a good question, because you need to come up with a mechanism that's going to be around, let's say 50 years, 100 years from now. So you have to figure in terms of that. So you have to bring in whatever the legal requirements are. You've got to make sure that nobody can break the code to haul that building away because they're going to put a skyscraper there or something of that sort. You've got to protect that, and after a while, it's like going to some of the historical buildings and other in libraries and what have you in the United States, and you have to protect those places so people of next generations can come back and ooh and ah and say, look what we do now. You know, we put on a couple wings and we fly to the moon, and back when their time, they couldn't, you know, walk down 3 miles without having to sleep or whatever it is. It, at least from my, you know, knothole, so to speak, I think it's really a map, if you really want to come, of what happened back in those days and what was the state of the art of being able to build a building like that. Did they chisel out every piece of wood from it, or did they have the machines of, you wouldn't have the machines of today, of course, but where it was done automatically? You could, you know, you maybe have 25 people working on something, the artistic inside structures or whatever, where today you got push a button and they're made. So those are the things, at least from my engineering background, that I just awe at that, and I sit there and say, how did they ever do that? Where did they get the wood that would last that long? And so that's from my eyes, because I'm more engineering oriented.
You have a deep appreciation.
I do. I've worked on the putting guides. I've known a lot of the astronauts early on in my career. And
What do you think of the area in general now, that since you grew up here and you come back year after year and you see the changes, the wineries, the new agricultural, the grapes, the vineyards, the sort of spirit of agricultural tourism going on around here. What do you take from all that?
I guess I'm old enough, of course, to have seen a lot of things. I look at that in a way that every new baby is born today will see a different world, and they're going to have a different education. They're going to have different tools in their toolbox than I have. And they will, as time goes on, God will help them to use those tools to something I could never imagine to do myself today, because I'm a marked person with my background and so forth. But this goes on generation, no different than Henry Ford when he started out in many respects. So I'm just a believer that says, given the way life is, we'll solve the future. And whether we all become friends or we build fences around our homes or whatever, that I can't tell you. But I'm very much, I'm a believer of mankind. And just in my own field, what they used to do in engineering versus what we do today is just tremendously different. And both production-wise and everything you can imagine that we're able to do and invent new materials and so forth. And that's going to continue. I'd like to come back in 100 years and say, oh my gosh, you know, I go here and I'm going to go head home and they're going to put me in a wire and I'm going to be there quickly and I can go out and have dinner with my wife tonight. And it's that kind of feeling, you know. You look at me now and you say, what have you been drinking? But that's the feel. Because it's fortunate for me, I guess speaking only for myself, I've been very, very blessed to work on some great programs for the United States. And like I say, the defense of our country with nuclear warheads and all those kind of things are all in my background.
So this is really an extension.
Yeah, this is
Passion
extension.
for the tavern, and your contribution in stepping up is an extension of that passion of being an American.
Yeah, I would like, it's a question, or turn it into a question, is that, you know, let's say 50 years from now, what's the tavern going to be? Just a flower pot? Or what is it going to be? And who knows? You and I will never know that, but there's somebody will be born, you know, 50 years from now or 25 years from now that will come forward and they'll have a lot more tools in their toolbox than we have right now. And they're going to be doing things. I don't think we're ever going to sit on electrons and travel from here to Spain or anything like that. But a lot of people say we can reduce you to a wire and we can wire you over there and then we recreate you. But technology is a wonderful thing because it's the kind of thing where you're always building. I'm sure there are people that go down there that are carpenters today and look at how it was done umpteen years ago. And it just makes them proud that now it takes them 10 minutes where it took those people maybe 10 hours to do something. So there's all these things that are automation and what have you are all a part of this whole big picture here. And I think we as human beings living today that can look at what our ancestors did is educational for everybody in a high school and so forth. And they can go in there and they can laugh. But about 10, 15 years later, they're going to look at that and say, wow.
And Ralph, where does the spirit of, you've got a phenomenal spirit of helping, just to hear you and talk to you, you inspire people to keep reaching for their dreams. What is that about you? Where did you get that? How do you, and you apply that whether you're putting a man on the moon or whether you're working on inspiring all of us to save a tavern or working on a team to solve a problem. Where does that come from?
I could be jovial and say I'm lazy and I want other people to get out front. But no, it's a very good question. I just had that in my life. I've had that, not trying to brag or anything, of if I do something and people say, how did you ever do that? I said, I break it down in finite elements. And I work on each one of the elements together. And one day I look up and I say, solved it. I take on the big problem. Everybody looks at it and says, oh my God, I can't do that. Break it all in little pieces and then solve every little piece. And then you say, I did it. The next guy comes up, I don't see how you did that, Ralph. And I say, it was simple. You break it in pieces. I got it down to my level of capability, and I fixed the little pieces. And then when I looked up, I said, son of a gun, we did it.
And that's what we have to do with the tavern.
That's right. And how we want to do it. We want to do it where we're going to make a modern area where you can go in there and you have all this automation and so forth. Or I'm more of a person that says that's history. And that's a perfect thing for young people to see how they did it and how they created it and how many days and now they have all this equipment, can make 25 pieces within so many minutes and they're all exactly the same, the tolerance and everything else. They couldn't do that. They had to try to make these things fit and there were human errors and so forth. So there's a lot of automation here. That's why you can build buildings, major buildings today, and you can, and they stay up for years and years because the materials have changed so much, and the ideas, the engineering equations have changed, etc. To a degree, more or less, going with the state of the art of the materials and so forth that are used in these applications. So, what we have there, at least in my vernacular, is. We just have a wonderful place to go, have a place to eat and look around and said, God bless you guys. You've been gone 200 years or whatever the thing is, and it's still there. What have I done today, Ralph, that's going to be here 200 years from today? And it's that thing. I look around and I look at the art and what have you and see how creative people have been in the buildings and what have you, and I just ask myself, how much is that, will people 200 years from now look at when Ralph Rocco may have been involved, not by name, but by age, if you will, of the technology and so forth. It's like automatic cars. I'd like to figure out how to get cars to talk to each other, they don't run into each other. They ignore each other. They have, maybe you do something in the roads or something, you have escape routes, whatever you want to do, so you can cut down the fatalities. One time you have a 12-year-old in the intersections of, another one's 85 years old. And you have to do something so the vehicles talk to each other and say, I'm going to bring us to safety, using the vehicles themselves. No different than when you get on a train somewhere, somebody else is, pushing the train and they're deciding how fast to go and so forth. And if the cars or vehicles can predict that, they can save a lot of people on the highway.
Is there anything else, Ralph, you want to emphasize about your contribution to the tavern, or how would you like to be known? I mean, I know you don't like to even talk about your matching fund.
Yeah, that's right. That's not any part of my thing.
You always like to play that down.
Yeah.
But you and Jim Klingbeil, I always thought it was funny how you said, Jim, I'll give this much if you match me.
You found that story somewhere.
Well, you told me.
Oh,
You
did
told
I?
me to do
Yeah,
that.
yeah. I said
And
you.
so you created a game out of this to get him to match you, and he did, and the tavern is benefiting from that.
Yeah. I've almost forgotten about that.
Yeah.
But those are just I once in a while hit my buddies. I've got to go, and once in a while they turn around on me, and I'll say, fine, you gave me something for my latest project, I'll help you out. Let's see what we can do. And then it's not only money, it's the mental thing. I call some guy, I've got a lot of very good friends around the country, and I say, you sure you're using the right material? And it starts there. Did you read they came out with new material 2 years ago? And I think it's better than the stuff you're using. And so I picked the reason I got into engineering, not that you want to know, is that I'm a farm boy. Baling wire, I don't know if you heard of that or not, but a lot of things broke, and we'd use baling wire to try to get it back functional. And so I kind of came to the conclusion that's kind of what an engineer is doing. You do with newer materials, new ideas, designs, whether it's race cars or whether it's landing a guy on the moon or whatever. And those are the things that new materials give you a wider scope of being able to do things you could never do heretofore. And so those are down to what I call the finite elements of everything. Everything in this room is a finite element at one time in its creation. And so that's just the way my mind works. And as always, engineering's been a fast. I worked out here, 4-H'er and so forth, and the farms and what have, growing up through high school, and then I go through college, and I say, oh, that's why they use that material. And
So Ralph, if you think about the tavern as a project that you have been leading and a mission, what do you want people to know about? What's the final thing for you when you see that building one day all done right? And all
yeah,
those
that's
pieces
enough for
together?
me. I mean, I say, hey, thanks, Lord. A lot of people help me, and that's it. I'm not here to make textbooks.
No, I know.
That's for sure. It's just something, and it's also, it's like some of these things I've mentioned, and I could tell you about the first reactor we put into space, and I was fortunate to be a part of that team with Atomics International, Canoga Park, California. And it's just this thing that, hey, it's the challenge of doing it and fun to do it. I'm not looking for my name in a textbook or anything.
But
Somebody
you
else.
like solving problems. You
Pardon?
like figuring things
Well,
out.
I then like call my friends and say, hey, do you have an algorithm that'll do this? And they'll say, what? What are you getting that crazy stuff, Ralph? And I said, you think about it, and I'll call you back in 2 weeks. And these are people I respect. And I know he's going to say that rock goes looking for an answer. And so I just have, because it's like anything. It's like the people you have and the friends that you buy into them, and they're solid citizens and so forth. And they like challenges too, just like my friends with that. And they'll come back and later on and say, gee, I can't figure it out. They'll come back and say, well, I've been looking for you, but here are a couple thoughts. And that brings us together as professionals. And it's the same with the materials in this room. And there is an evolution that goes on to...
Here's my last question. That
Sure.
made me think of something. At a time in our nation's history when there seems to be so much strife, so many competing ideas and a lot of angst going on, no matter where we look, How do you think this tavern is keeping our community knit together? How do you think the tavern is a project that keeps us united?
Well, I think that boils down to, and it's a good question, by the way, and of course I'd be with you trying to make it happen, but it boils down to coming up with techniques. Now, if you want to use it as a draw for people from all over the world, just to say this was built in such and such a time and give them the whole story, particularly people who are more oriented to history and what have you. And I'm not sure I'm going down the right path here to answer your question, but
it seems like that tavern is a place where community is drawn and people want to serve.
yeah, the term I use, I don't know what term you use, is that you want to keep it evergreen. Yeah, and so you want to keep it what it's doing now, you want to improve that, and then and continue to think ahead. And then, of course, you have to find out what are the potential groups that might utilize that particular operation there, and then build that. And maybe there's somebody that comes on and say, well, we need a couple wings or something built to it to really get the full bang out of the whole thing, from the historical standpoint to the practical side, and et cetera, et cetera. Yeah, so you have to look at all the fundamentals, where most of us, particularly people like where I am, in my early 80s, and I look at that and I said, they did a good job back there then, and others, and I'd like to see, somebody 80 years from now saying, hey, they had the right idea. We have better metals now. We have different ways of doing things, but they were on the right trail. That building for the future. That would be my kind of overall model, which is practiced all the time because I've not done any big deal, but I'm involved in the defense of our country, and so we're always working on ways to counter the other guy, the bad guys, and so it's kind of that way, taking new materials. If the three of us could come in with some kind of a material that would eliminate 30% of the wood in the world, and our idea does makes it last 5 times longer than it does today. We'd have something really going for us. Yeah.
I think what you just said, building for the future. That's what you're seeing this project. We're building for the future.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
We're preserving something, but we're building for the future. Maybe just say that again for me and put it in your words.
Yeah, okay. When I talk about, it's just...
Put your hand down.
Oh, yeah, excuse me.
Okay.
That's right, I keep forgetting that we're using that.
That's good.
Have I used my nose yet?
No.
It's a very good question, I think. Let's see, how could I... give it to me again, I'll see if I can...
I said, as you were speaking, you said the tavern, even though we're preserving the history and celebrating or acknowledging the amazing materials and how long it took, you're building, the tavern is about really building for the future.
No, it's really, how can you say it? It's a structural piece of equipment, or whatever you want to call it, that represents a certain age of our society, or something that may not be so.
We're modernizing it for the future.
Yeah, we're modernize it, and then somebody's got to make a decision to say, we don't really want to modernize it. We may modernize it by putting, instead of wood in, put something else in that's going to last 100 years, or whatever, do to keep that history going. But it won't be a carbon copy of what it really was. That's the only thing I said, because sooner or later, the wear and tear are no different than our own personal bodies, regardless of different ages and so forth. And so it's pretty hard to stop that cycle. But I think people can come in with materials that will last for 100 years eventually, and different things like that. And it goes back, and again, it's that line between historians and also maybe people like me who are thinking of what tomorrow going to bring. Not that I take a lot of focus on what people have done years ago just because they didn't have graduate schools. They didn't have all these other tools in their toolbox. And so what they did was through their mind and so forth to make things happen. And then eventually, I could start out with, I guess, a horse and buggy and end up with automobiles would be a big example.